So welcome to Unscripted, the speaker series, and welcome to TAP. It's my pleasure to welcome both our online audience and our in-person audience. The two people to my right and my left are two of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And there's lots of friendly faces here in the house, so it's nice to see you all. The exhibition that we're standing in is Taryn Elizabeth Henry. So the works you see in behind us where we're holding the talk. This is a Sarnia-based artist who went to Fanshawe. The works that we'll be talking about, as well as some of the other works, but the community portrait works are in the lab. So if you haven't had a chance to view those works, please do so while you're here, and then you can talk to Wyn about them. I've got a couple of housekeeping things that we need to keep in mind. We want the audience both online and in-house to think about your questions. We're going to hand you a mic if you're in-house, and that's so that the online audience and the recording can pick up your question. So don't ask a question until you have the mic. We're going to take questions at the end of the presentation, which will be about 45 minutes, roughly. And we'll take as many questions online as well. So as you think about your questions, please put them online. I think that's it, except that, of course, to my left is Wyn Geleynse, and to my right is Josh Lambier. And Josh Lambier will be interviewing Wyn. He is going to put us through our paces. He'll also help with some of the questions and get some of those answers. And of course, a warm, warm welcome to Wyn Geleynse, who is our guest artist for this Unscripted series. So let's put our hands together and welcome Wyn and Josh.
I'm going to get Sarah to turn the second mic off. There we go, so it doesn't take room noise. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening on site here at TAP and online for the Unscripted series, which brings together artists and creative professionals across multidisciplinary genres and fields to hear unscripted stories, to ask questions, and to learn more about our featured guests' artistic practice and approach to creativity. I'm Josh Lambier, the director of the Words Festival, and I'm very pleased to join Wyn Geleynse for tonight's conversation. First off, however, I want to extend a very warm note of thanks to the team here at TAP, Sandra DeSalvo, Sarah Legault, Kieran Belanger, and the entire team for their commitment and dedication to the arts of London and for inviting me back to their space to participate in this very wonderful series. Hosting Unscripted, as I've told them many, many times before, really is one of the most enjoyable experiences I have as a member of the London arts community. So I'm really pleased to be back with you again tonight. If you're new to the Unscripted series at TAP, you've chosen a great night to join us on site or from home online. This series hosts events that are intimate, interactive, and memorable. This evening's conversation is taking place near the conclusion of a unique exhibition called Community Portraits 2023-2024. which collects together a series of 41 watercolor portraits that acclaimed multimedia artist Wyn Geleynse has created to document and honor his friends and colleagues and to capture his experience of community in London, Ontario. The series of portraits were presented one or two at a time each month, beginning at Milosh's Craft Beer Emporium last September to December, and then here at TAP Center for Creativity from January to the end of May. I think I have that correct. Yes, January to the end of May. So you're catching the exhibition just at the end of an extended run from last September 2024 to May here in 2025. For those who may recognize Wyn for his uncanny ability to identify relationships between objects, images, movement, and sound in his film and projection work, the exhibition of watercolor portraits may appear as quite a departure from his distinguished body of work that earned him a Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts in 2018. But, as I hope we'll see tonight, the exhibition actually marks a return to an earlier interest in drawing and painting and to themes that weave their way throughout his career. Over the next hour or so, We are going to explore Wyn's exhibition of community portraits, as well as trace its influence back through his larger body of work. And we're going to take your questions here at TAP and on the webinar's Q&A function. So send along your cogitations and questions at any time at home. I guess you could send them telepathically to me in the mid-presentation here, and I'll pick them up. But we'll bring them up at the end. We'll have plenty of time to interrogate Wyn with questions at the end. Wyn Geleynse is a trailblazing figure in the visual and media arts in Canada with an acclaimed career in installation-based film and video projection that extends over 5 decades. He grew up in London, Ontario after his family emigrated from Rotterdam in the aftermath of World War II, and he attended our celebrated Beal Art program in the mid-1960s when London regionalism was becoming a nationally recognized art movement. His work raises questions about self and identity, the boundaries of public and private spheres, and he investigates universal experiences of the human condition with a characteristic blend of irony and humor. He is interested in the notion of film projection as a metaphor for projecting one's thoughts and desires. In recognition of his extensive and compelling body of work, he received the Governor General's Award in the Visual and Media Arts, one of 3 in the London community to receive this award. Please join me in welcoming tonight Wyn Geleynse.
Thank you.
Okay. So in my opening remarks, I mentioned that your watercolor community portraits here at TAP might seem like a departure from previous work, especially for those who might know you for your film and projection works. But it actually marks a return to your early interest in drawing and painting, even as far back as your student days. So I thought it might be helpful for everyone to revisit briefly your early student days at H.B. Beal Secondary's legendary art program, which you attended. Can I say the dates?
Sure.
Yeah, 63 to 66. Can you talk a little bit about your time at Beal, what motivated you to enroll, and what your experience was like?
Actually, I wasn't really motivated to enroll. I was encouraged by my art teacher at Weeble when I went there, because it was the only thing I could do reasonably well, because I failed grade 9, so I had to repeat it. So in that second year, he said, maybe you want to try Beal, take the art program. Because the implication was, you're not going to do very well here. So I guess that was in some ways a motivator. But my experience at Beal was really varied. I hated school, and I didn't like it. The art program was really meant to produce commercial artists, because this was obviously pre-computer days, so all newspaper and catalog illustrations outside of photography were all done by hand, especially a lot of advertising. So I got a very rounded education, which in fact could have led me into a second-year university or college program, which I actually tried in Quebec for about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
With my friend Richard Fulton and I, but we didn't have any money because we were waiting for the government grants to come in, which they didn't. Plus I couldn't speak French very well, and we were living on instant coffee and popcorn.
Wow, okay.
So my parents had to wire money for me to come home. And I remember when I walked in the door, my father looked at me and said, why did you come back? So it was that was my previous educational experience.
Right. Now, when I had this great opportunity to go and join Wyn in his studio earlier this week, and one of the things that I was so struck by was how well you could remember some of your high school teachers, like Herb Arris. And could you talk a little bit about some of those teachers that influenced you?
Oh, they were really good. Herb Arris was number one. Hugh Mackenzie was another. He was what we used to call the drawing master. He would walk around the class, and if he couldn't pull the pencil out of your hand, he'd rap you on the head with it, because he wanted you to have a very loose sort of technique. And he taught me one really important method of drawing, which I never heard of before. It's called contour drawing, as opposed to sketching. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you use a pen and ink or a pencil, and you would sort of draw the outlines of the figure that you were wanting to render. So it's very complicated, and if you made a mistake, you had to live with the mistake. But as you sketch, you can sort of sketch in, and then you go back and trace it off. So it was my favorite form of drawing. That's the way I drew mostly all the time. The other teacher was whose name I just slipped my mind, unfortunately. Cameron. He was the drafting teacher. And what was great about him is that he also taught photography in a closet in the drawing studio.
Right.
We used to have to bring our water in pails, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
it was unventilated, you can well imagine. But I learned photography very early. And I'm glad I did, because both drawing and photography together were the two favorite things in my life. So Beale, again, gave me a good round of the thing. The other thing was Herb Harris. He taught ceramics. Sorry, the other person was Herb Harris. He taught ceramics, which I hated. So I told him that after he bummed another cigarette from me. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to learn how to weld. So I learned how to weld while I was ceramics class, and I got my passing mark for that.
That's amazing.
So-
Wow. I mean, and you can tell, very well-rounded, you say well-rounded experience of,
Beale was really good like that.
Yeah.
Really good.
absolutely. And I think you said it kind of taught you how to learn, right? And in addition to being something that you had those individual disciplines, but there
Yeah.
was something about a facility to take on something new.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that I don't have a grade 12 education always sort of made me feel, in some of the other places I engaged with in my life, as a bit of an imposter. But the one thing Bill taught me was how to learn.
Right.
And I've been self-taught, sort of self-proclaimed autodidact
Yeah.
throughout my career. And whatever I needed to know, I just got to learn it. I still
Right.
do.
Yeah, and we're going to return to that later in the hour, too, because I think it comes out in your work. While you were a student at Beale, the London regionalism movement was beginning to gain momentum
Yep.
and attention, national and even international attention, too. And you had the opportunity to engage with artists like Greg Cournot and Murray Favreau, among others. Could you talk about the experience of visiting their studios and how that impacted you to be able to do that?
Well, in English class, the English teacher asked us to write about some people in London that we know, that we admired.
Oh, wow.
So I took it upon myself, this was I think in grade 10 or 11, to go and meet Greg Cournot and Jack Chambers. So I literally made a book, and I did photographs because I was learning photography at the same time, in this sort of cardboard-made book that I presented as my essay. So after that, Greg used to let me hang around the studio. Until one day he was sitting there doing a drawing of Sheila, and I was looking over his shoulder. And that was the end of that.
Oh.
He basically told me, all right, I don't want you to do that anymore, so get out. Something like that anyway. So it was, I mean, I did come back later, of course.
Yeah.
And also when Murray and Ron Martin had their studio on Dundas Street, where the new courthouse is now,
Oh, okay.
they used to let me hang out there as well. And I think the one thing I remember well, I told you the other day, is that Ron Martin always told me that after you finish painting and you clean your brushes in turpentine or water, always make sure you wash them with soap. So it's a lesson I learned really well
Yeah.
from that, and I do that to this day now. So
Right, and what was it like to be around? Because Murray was a big influence, too.
very big influence, yeah. His film work was really important to me
Yeah.
because it showed me that art could be something other than painting and drawing and the traditional things. You know, given my European background, I guess I felt more akin to that Northern European history of art.
Right.
And so London opened my eyes to very different ways of working.
Yeah.
And the options that you could exercise.
Absolutely. The London regionalists made the case that artists could make a living as artists in London, and they could take inspiration from situations, experience, things that were around them.
Yeah.
Was that something that resonated with you as an emerging artist, that ready-to-hand things that were around you?
Well, very much, because I think that the thing I learned from Greg more than the other ones was you could be an artist. You can make a living being an artist in this city. It's something that never occurred to me.
Right.
You know, because being an immigrant family, your family tried to channel you into a career of some sort, you know, like law, you know, or medicine or carpentry or whatever skill you might have. So that made it viable for me, but it took a long time for that to actualize in my life. I probably, as an artist, I don't think things started really happening for me career-wise until I was in my late 30s.
Right.
So it was a long time coming, but we stuck through it and had a lot of support from my family.
Yeah.
You know, which makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Of course.
One of the things that we talked about when we were in your studio, and many in the room will probably know this, but the Fanshawe College just recently drastically cut back their fine arts program. And this is happening to us in London, but it's happening in cities all across Canada because of the college cuts. But I think your experience demonstrates just how valuable early mentorship and being exposed to artists was for you.
Yeah. Well, I don't think Greg consciously was my mentor.
Yeah.
We didn't really become friends till much later.
Okay.
It wasn't until after, actually, this might sound like a put down, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until after I'd shown in New York and stuff like that that Greg and I started having more of a dialogue.
Right.
Because I think legitimately we probably had something more to talk about
Yeah.
at that point, and then unfortunately he passed away.
Right.
But that's a fairly typical Canadian story that you have to leave in order to come back. You know, and it was in those days. It's not so much now.
Yeah.
It certainly was in those days.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And one of the other important narrative threads that I want to bring in from your history that I'd like to introduce here, because it's going to kind of build us towards the work that's showing in the gallery right now, is an early interest in photography, which you've mentioned. But I want to take it even further back, that you mentioned to me when I did a visit with you that you went with your father along his cleaning route.
Yeah.
And could you tell us about that those early trips with your father and how they offered you an introduction and maybe even a skepticism towards photography?
Okay. An immigrant family. My father worked as an orderly at Victoria Hospital here in London, but to make ends meet, he would clean offices in the evening on the weekends. And both my sister and I, when we were, well, she's 5 years older, but she started earlier and quit later. We were about 12 years old. We'd be going with our father to help clean. I'd be like sweeping floors, emptying ashtrays, and things like that. And I'd get some good pocket money out of it, right? Which let me go to double matinees and stuff in the theater. However, the one place, which was literally right over here, across the street, at 212 Dundas Street, there was a building that housed a beauty salon, a photography studio, a dance studio, Dorothy Scruton's dance studio upstairs, and a finance company. I think it was Beneficial Finance. So we cleaned all of these spaces on Saturday. And during a break, the finance company had a subscription to magazines like Life magazine, Look magazine, Acclaimed, and a few other ones. And so I, go through all these magazines while I was trying to have my lunch or eating my lunch. And as a kid, I just loved all the pictures.
Yeah.
So I'm going through Life magazine one day, and I see this photograph of a group of soldiers marching along from left to right. And there was a caption that said the victorious troops marching into whatever city, whatever locale, or whatever, for whatever occasion or battle that took place. So I remember this kind of interesting because it was just a photograph of soldiers. It could mean anything, but the caption told me what to think. So about a month later, I'm going through Life magazine again. There's the same photograph, but reversed. The soldiers are now marching from right to left. And the caption was, the defeated army of blah, blah, blah was leaving the whatever it was. And sort of a light went on in my head. I mean, I was, 12 years old. But I realized this is something odd. This is something manipulative, that's going on with that. And I think it was my sort of first insight of how pictures can be made to mean whatever one chooses.
Right.
So that was sort of an important lesson in my life.
Yeah, and quite a precocious observation, too.
Yeah, well, I'm hindsight of saying this. I'm not too sure how precocious it was. So.
Well, it's fascinating. Another thing that I'd like to kind of pick up as well. As important as Greg Curnow was, you began to move away from drawing and painting as an artistic discipline in the 1980s. So you returned to photography. Can you talk about that departure from painting toward photography and what motivated that?
Insecurity, fear. I didn't think I was a very good painter. It's just really those two things. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence.
Right. And
consequently, I probably wasn't the best person in the world at that time. It was just a very difficult time for me. I was sort of lost. I got this great job through Helmut Becker working at Western. And I got to know all the faculty there, of course, and a lot of the students. And I was bemoaning the fact that I'm not a very good painter. This would have been probably in the 76, 77, to Patterson Ewan. And he said to me, well, Wyn, you don't have to paint. And again, it was one of those, epiphanal moments in your life and you realize, you're right.
Yeah.
And so I sort of just went back to the other love was photography. And I started exploring photographs in ways I hadn't done before. But a number of things happened almost simultaneously. I also, a couple of years prior to that, I worked at a camera store called Ron Nelson Photography.
Yeah.
And the store manager, Jerry Casino, was a good friend of Garth Hudson's from the band. And every time Garth was in town to visit his parents, he'd drop in to see Jerry. So I got to know Garth through that, just sort of as a customer.
That's amazing.
Yeah, anyways, he was a very nice man, very quiet.
Yeah.
And so one day he came in with a box of a 16 millimeter Kodak 1A camera. It's one of those old black ones, pardon me, in a box of film. And his father had passed away, and he was bringing it into the store to see if we could sell it. So I ended up buying it with a box of film. So it was Garth Hudson's father's 16 millimeter camera. And I did my very first film work with that camera.
Wow.
And it was just a very simple thing. I asked a friend of mine who had a studio, didn't have one, that I wanted to do something about indecision. So I put 3 chairs in a sort of triangle. I had to move from one chair to the next chair, wiggling around, trying to get wasn't comfortable, like the 3 little pigs, right? And then you went from one chair in the sort of loop, which is important to note because looping became really important in my work, as you probably well know. So, and I made a device, which we won't discuss here, that you would look into it in order to see what was going on in this sort of very highly personal thing that he was doing. But you were like the sort of voyeur looking into this experience that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to see. I'm losing track of what I was saying now. So where were you?
No, you're right on track in terms of coming back and working in Rob Nelson. That 16 millimeter became kind of a first entry point, bringing together photography and film.
Yeah. So when Patterson set me straight, I started experimenting both with film, but also with the technology of cinema.
Right.
So I actually started building devices that were built on, or were not built, but were made after 19th century blueprints for early motion picture devices.
Oh, wow.
So some of them, a couple of them are in the Museum London collection. There's other ones that are at the AGO. So I built about 6 or 7 of these devices.
Right.
So, but that's where I learned that I could make things.
Yeah.
To some degree, but which developed much later on in my career as well.
Right.
So
I found this story, and I can't help but ask this question. I read somewhere that you made use of that 16 millimeter camera to create an amateur Keystone Cops silent film. Is this the case while you were at work at Ron Nelson Photography?
Where did you learn that? All right, so
it's true.
yeah, well, a good friend of ours at that time, Joseph Dunlop Adley, started working there as well. He was taking film at Fanshawe, and he ended up actually teaching film and running the film department for a while after he graduated. He and I were working there together, and on Saturday afternoons we'd be bored out of our mind. Well, we had all this film equipment, and Ron Nelson was really generous. He would let you use all the film you want just so you would know all the equipment and how to use it and what it could do. He was very, very generous that way.
Yeah. I
was really, really fortunate. So in the back at the photo studio, they had these big, narrow lockers that would just fit a person. So we did this film of the doors opening and closing and people appearing in and out of it and stuff. Where did you learn this?
The things you can find.
Yeah, really. Yeah, so that was a Keystone Cops film.
Well, and I like the fact, just the experimentation, and the fact that you were, equipment wasn't something that you feared. You ran towards equipment.
Pretty well, if it was available.
Yeah.
And if you could afford it, of course.
Right, and another moment, too, that I think is important to kind of bring in along this journey, if you can remember this one, a creative inspiration from Murray Favreau on your work. But there was one exhibition at Forest City Gallery that used a wave machine to move a canvas which projected an image on it.
Yeah,
do you remember this and how this was?
I know it intimately, believe me.
Yeah, well, tell us about this.
Well, I'd never experienced anything like this before, so we went to the opening, and there was the wave machine, Forest City Gallery. So there was a 60 millimeter projector, and it was pointed down at an angle to this contraption all made out of wood. Okay, no metal gearing or anything. And what it did, it undulated this canvas that was lying on the thing. So as he projected it, it wasn't always quite synchronized, which is what I liked the most.
Right.
So that the wave would come in, and the motion would simulate that wave rolling. And it was Lake Erie by the cottage we all used to rent too. And we know exactly where it was on the beach. And I was just dumbfounded. This was fantastic. This was great. And what that piece taught me is that art can be something other than the traditional things like I mentioned earlier before. It just reinforced that for me. So it encouraged me to start experimenting more with films because of seeing Murray's piece. Like I say, all these things sort of happened at the same time. And then being at Western, I had access to dark rooms and everything else, and I learned how to develop my own 60mm film because I couldn't afford the lab fees.
Right.
So I learned all these skills as necessary to develop the work. And a few years after that, Murray and I actually did a piece together at Western through the lab. And what we did was we took a photograph, two photographs, one through a green filter and one through a red filter of exactly the same object. Then when you projected them back and superimpose one over the other, you'd have 3 full colors in the projection. So it's something he always wanted to sort of figure out. So I built a projector that actually was able to make you do that. So I made it after having made all those other objects and stuff like that.
Amazing.
Machining all that stuff.
And it's a great transition to a question I wanted to ask, and I'll set this question up by remarking on a couple of things that I found about Wyn as I was preparing for today. And an early essay on your work, and it actually is in this, it's a catalog from the London Region Art Museum before it was Museum London. There's an essay by Matthew Teitelbaum which describes you as a bricoleur, redeploying a concept from the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss to describe one who uses what's ready to hand or pre-existing things to create new combinations and novel ways of putting things together that inspires playfulness, originality, and creativity. Paul Wald and Andrew Wright evoke a similar spirit of creativity in their description of you as a restless tinkerer who is endlessly experimenting with old and new techniques, maybe odd techniques as well. I really appreciated both of these descriptions, the bricoleur and the restless tinkerer, because they point to what we've been hearing about you and the ability to work with these inventive things that you find around you to make new objects and structures that sensitize us to the physical properties, mechanics, and construction of image making that are often concealed in the process of photography and film. So the question I have, kind of setting it up that way, is how did you develop this facility to create original devices, and where did you find the material to do this?
We were poor. Growing up, we were poor. My parents, worked a lot, and I couldn't afford art supplies or anything like that, so you worked with what you had at hand.
Right.
I remember used to scrounge some of the first watercolors I did were on sheets of plywood because I couldn't have any paper, right? So I got scraps and stuff like that. So I was always picking up scraps because where I grew up in East London, I was surrounded by scrap yards, warehouses, and the CN Roundhouse and the coal chute there at Adelaide Street, by just south of the overpass, that empty field. It was all busy. That was my playground. So scrap was just there. It was there for the taking.
Yeah.
So I used whatever I could, and I still do. I mean, literally on the way home, I picked up one piece of broken plastic and one little green mold toy thing for a watercolor I'm working on, which I will incorporate into the watercolor. Because I'm doing a landscape of Rectory Street, which is based on all the garbage I keep seeing along the street from the bus stop to the studio every day. So
that's amazing. I'm going to pull some of these threads together to kind of pull us back into some of the history in film and video projection work, back towards the genre of portrait, which is the subject of this exhibition, by highlighting one earlier work in particular called Portrait of My Father. And Sarah, for the viewers at home, can see a picture here. And I actually brought this, and actually maybe even can hand it around to people in the room. Let's just grab the right image here. Put this over here. And if you can't see it in the room, I'll hand it around. But this is the work here that we're going to be talking about. Actually, maybe I'll send this. at that. Okay. Yeah, you've seen it for sure. So this particular work, which, as I say, I brought along the catalog, shows Wyn's innovative use of projected film strip on a still photograph with the projector in the foreground space. And I think this work is actually in the permanent collection at Museum London.
Yes, it is, yeah.
As a work that uses conventions of portraiture, I thought it might be a nice transition back towards your portrait work. But can you tell us the genesis of this work and what it's about?
Well, I've done two particular works about my dad. That was the first one. Usually it's the father that shows proud photographs of the son or the daughter. And I sort of wanted to reverse that because, as I've told you already, my father worked pretty hard in order to provide for us. And I guess in some way I wanted to show my pride. And so what I did, I had Brenda McEachran, who some of you may know, who used to be the slide librarian at the Visual Art Department at Western. She was a really good, accomplished photographer, so I had her take a photograph of me standing outside the building holding a white card like this, just a blank white card. And so what I did, I asked my father to come up to my studio, which was actually where the can is now, the Canada Life.
Oh, right.
I call it the can.
Right, yeah.
Used to be there.
Yeah.
At 6,000 square feet.
Now home
Way
of the
too
London
big.
Knights.
Yeah, anyways. So I asked him to come up to my studio, and he reluctantly came. And so I said, okay, Dad. So I set him up in the chair, and I got the camera ready, and I was, okay, Dad, so just relax and sit there. But he's a very nervous man. So he was sitting there, and his leg was starting to go like this. And he's licking his lips nervously, like really bad. And then, I said, well, I started the camera rolling, right? And so he says, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, just give me a minute, let me decide what to do. So I got about 3 minutes of that, and I said, okay, we're done. And he was quite surprised. So he really projected that anxiety of his character. I mean, I have to give you a bit of history. My father was a baker and had his own bakery and store in Rotterdam, and when the Germans bombed the core of Rotterdam flat, they lost everything. My parents lost everything.
Right.
And my sister and I think, have come to the conclusion now that my father, because the parents I had were not the parents that my sister and my two brothers had, because I was born after the war. Very different man. So we think he may have suffered from PTSD.
Right.
Now we think that now, but of course we didn't know what it was at the time. So all that anxiety sort of came out in that. So what I did, I projected him onto that blank page, as you'll all see. But what I also did, because I didn't have colored film, I got colored pencil. And where the film appeared on the white paper, I would just color in his brown pants and his shirt and his brown shoes and a bit of his gray hair. But when you turned it off, all you saw was a ghost of that image with the colored pencil. So I thought it was for me, it was sort of a nice gesture towards my father. And he liked it.
Oh, yeah, that was my next question, is how he...
Yeah, he liked it.
Right. How did he feel? Because did your grandfather, he was a painter, yes?
Yeah, how did you know that?
Well,
did I tell you that?
No, you didn't tell me
yeah,
that.
he
I
was,
found
yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
So he must have already been, he must have had an empathy for an artistic pursuit that you were...
Oh, hell no.
No? Okay.
No. Like I told you, my parents wanted me to be a lawyer.
Right,
or something,
you did say that. You did say that.
But my grandfather, he used to paint how many of you have been to Holland at all? Many. You know what a brown cafe is? These are all small cafes that have brown mahogany, and they often had a mural atop of the wainscoting. So my grandfather painted these murals in these brown cafes as a career. And he also did potboiler paintings. So he would work with a group of artists, and I didn't know this about him, but Bert Klusman, one of my teachers, told me about this technique during the war. But my grandfather was pre-war. What they did, they would have like 10 easels set up with 10 artists. One guy was good for the sky, the other guy was good for the foreground, right? And so they cranked them out like a factory line.
Yeah.
And because I've seen the exact same painting in Holland in antique shops, that my grandfather did. And every time I'm surprised. And, and I didn't know this until Bert Klusman explained to me what they did. So That's what he did. But he was not bad. I have one of his paintings at the house.
Yeah.
So.
But your father did like the piece that, you know.
Well, it was my
presented.
maternal grandfather, not and my mother definitely didn't want me to become an artist because of her
I see.
experience. Yeah.
I see. Okay. One of the things I find interesting about this too is that it introduces human subjects in the way that you work with technology. And this is something I did learn from you when I visited your studio. This sparked a remark from Murray Favreau to compare and contrast your
Yeah.
work. Could you tell about this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because I was doing projection work, and it was because Murray influenced me. We never really spoke about it. So we were at an opening at Museum London one afternoon or one evening, and just apropos, nothing at all, Murray says to me, "Well, you know the difference between you and me, that you use people, I don't use people." So Murray's sort of gruff, direct voice, and sort of took me back, but it was absolutely true. It's absolutely true, because he really made objects.
Yeah.
And projected onto objects or into objects and everything else. Whereas I was far more interested in, I guess, sort of making suggested narratives using people. Because people are far more interested in looking at other people.
Yeah.
You know, it's a natural thing.
Right.
You know, when we talk like you and I are talking, we're looking at each other. So I try to sort of create those sort of situations, but without, because it's film, people expect narrative, but I didn't like that.
Yeah.
Partly because of the fact that what I learned about photographs
Yeah.
as
that
a
distrust.
kid. When I
Yeah.
started going to movies after that moment, I began to realize how manipulative they were, and it kind of upset me. You know, because I remember I would cry. You know, when the cavalry showed up, I was so happy, and I thought somehow that's wrong. At some point in my life, I came to that realization. So
Yeah.
so I mean, human relationships are the staff of our life, right? This
Right.
is when you have nothing else, you have your family and your friends.
Yeah, and you do capture that psychological element too, and you mentioned in your father's anxiety, but anxiety comes up, and I mentioned this in your studio as well.
Yeah.
I see, you know, a lot of interrogation of that, and maybe I can introduce another element here too as well, and you mentioned this when we were talking, but it comes out in your work. When you were at Western, you had the opportunity to work with a number of faculty members, in particular female faculty members, who introduced you to some of the writing of feminist thought that was coming in the 1970s and 80s, and you remarked that the introduction of feminist thought had a really huge impact in terms of what you were doing with those subjects in the film work.
That's absolutely true. And one of them is actually here, but I won't say any names. I mentioned earlier how anxious and unsure of myself I was. And I think it's through befriending a lot of these younger faculty, female faculty, which was all male when I first started. I think it allowed me to get a greater insight into what I was as a person. You know, I was never one of these manly men, so to speak. And, you know, a couple of my friends joke at each other that we're kind of girly men. And I think because of that sort of interaction, and also there's another thing, is that throughout my teenage life, in my early 20s, almost all my best friends were women. So I felt more comfortable with women than with men at that time. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, which was to coincide with me being at Western, that I started getting male friends. So, but yeah, I think it had a huge impact on me. And I think through osmosis, I sort of learned a great deal about language,
Right.
and how the feminist movement, the first thing they started was to take back language that I experienced at that time. And that was an important thing for me to learn as well, how language functions and how it works.
Was this the source of or in some way related to the genesis of the hapless male?
The hapless male, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the hapless
Well,
male?
you're looking at him. How much more hapless could you get? Yeah, I developed this character outside of myself. I mean, he was sort of a reflection of me, but I think he was more a reflection of what I thought I might be. So I sort of let him have free rein in front of the camera.
Yeah.
I always thought he was kind of funny.
He is very funny.
I mean, one of my favorite ones is
Endearing, too.
Is my 11-year-old daughter beating me on the back with a stick while I'm counting money inside this glass house. Mara, I know you're listening. I think you might remember.
Sarah's confirming.
Thumbs up, yeah. Does she still like it? Ask her.
Her favorite.
So, yeah,
wow, look at that.
Yeah. So conditions like that. Another one I did was with Lucretia here. It was about sort of self-absorption of a male, and what it was another glass house piece. I worked an awful lot with glass. This woman in a beautiful kimono smoking a cigarette or holding a cigarette. You can see the smoke building up in the film. Then on the ground, there's just this guy, and he's got this big metal airplane, and he's looking at him, fiddling around with the propeller. Then he picks it up at one point. He starts swinging it around like this and playing with it. She sort of looks down in disdain. He does not acknowledge her at all. Keeps playing with the airplane, puts it down, and then it sort of loops back on itself and starts over again. And again, this is in a small glass house. And just as a point of interest, it's important that all that early work I did on a very small scale on purpose. It's easy with film to create sort of spectacle. That is bigger than you or bigger than the viewer, but I wanted everything to be within the sight of the viewer. And it was always presented at eye level, general eye level as well, because I wanted them to be able to see everything at the one time, right? So they could take the pieces and maybe fabricate whatever their response might be. So it wasn't overwhelming them, so they weren't being looked down upon, and they didn't have to look up at something as well.
Amazing. And very rich answer, too. Thank you for that. I want to jump ahead to the current exhibition, now that we have some of our key pieces that we've been working through to kind of assemble here. And I thought we could talk a little bit about your methodology for creating the portraits of community portraits, which returns us to your passion for drawing and painting, which we heard about a little bit earlier. Now, in the early 2010s, you started to return to your early interest in drawing. Could you talk about what precipitated that return to drawing?
I told you, but I can't remember. I wanted to try it again. It was like a demon that hadn't sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
Small d demon.
Right.
That hadn't disappeared in my life. And also I was at that point in my life where I didn't have to prove anything anymore, because the film work and the later video work developed quite a large audience.
Right.
So I had the luxury, and I mean that luxury, of being able to do whatever I wanted. And to me, it was an unresolved issue. I still drew all that time, but it was never drawing for the sake of drawing. And I knew that I wasn't like a photographer in the traditional sense of, say, street photography. I never really did photography as a means in and of itself.
Yeah.
It was always a means to another end.
Right.
So I thought, I'll just putz around. So I went to Bijon's and I bought a roll of really cheap, 100-foot roll of cheap white, certain type of paper, but it was like $9.95 a roll. And so I took it to my studio, and I just hung it on the wall. And I went to the dollar store and bought some cheap brushes, and I took a nail clipper and clipped the brushes up so they wouldn't make a very good line, like a sort of broken line. And I used to do contour drawing, so I just pulled the sheet down, and I dipped my brush into the ink, and I started drawing. A lot of the sources I took from current events that were going on. It started with the Arab Spring.
Which is about 2010.
So I had a lot of images of crowds, people throwing rocks and stuff like that. And if I liked the drawing, I'd pull the roll down and start another one above it. And if I didn't like that one, I'd put an X through it, and then I would just pull it down. So I did about 200 or 300 feet of these drawings, these roll drawings, and then that started developing as my sort of confidence grew. It started developing into focusing on more and more things, and so that's how it developed over the last
and I love the
15
fact
years.
too that those Life and Look magazine, this is bringing back that photojournalism too with the Arab Spring shots. So you see these moments where when you see the works here, they look like departure, but you can actually see these early strands that we're picking up from your early work. While you were returning to drawing, you were still doing video work. And you completed a series of video interviews, and I emailed you this morning to get the dates for this, between 2012 and 2014. Can you tell us about the video interviews, the video portraits, and I think there's about 9 of them, if I'm correct, and what inspired you to do the video portraits?
Well, I was working at that time with a lot of people who I earned a great deal of respect for because Lucretia and I volunteered at the Unity Project. And I ended up with the Upward Art Committee. So I got to know Sylvia Langer really well. We became very close friends and still are, as well as Chuck Lazenby, who's the director. She's my tattooist, for those of you, just to put a little plug in for her. So I wanted to, Sylvia was the first one. I wanted to do a portrait just out of respect for her.
Yeah.
And so I approached her. I said, well, I have this sort of project in mind. I'd like to do a portrait of you. So I sort of laid out the groundwork. I said, you can choose a location and you can tell me whatever you want about yourself. You could lie. Doesn't matter. I didn't care because I figured whatever they're going to tell you is going to give some indication of who they were. And you can see through hand gestures, a few other things that I told you that people did without being aware of it, which I'm probably doing right now anyways. And so we went to a coffee shop and we shot it there. And then the deal was I would take it back to the studio, and I took a page out of Murray Favreau's handbook, and I made these three-dimensional screens. Again, they're only about this large. I think the largest was maybe about this big. And I would make them so they had some depth. Right. So you'd see images in the foreground of something was on the table, then you'd see some next to them, and then them within that context to give you an idea. So she told me some stories, and a few things slipped out that she was unaware of. And so the deal was, of course, that I would make a mock-up of this before I did a final version, and I would invite the subject to the studio. Then if they liked it, with their agreement, I would finish the work, and I would ask them to sign a model release so I could exhibit it. If they didn't like it, I would just destroy everything, which happened a couple of times out of the ones that I did. I did more than 9, but not all of them were successful.
Right.
And so I did all that. I just destroyed it all, so nothing of it exists, so it wouldn't embarrass anybody. And you can tell the other part of the story that you found out.
Well, no, it ended up, I actually was here for one of the openings, and Sylvia, when we were going and seeing the portraits in the lab here, told the story of hers, and I'll leave her to tell that story, but it was very confessional. And
very confessional.
It's one of the things that you noted as well, that people revealed things that maybe they just didn't even know that they were going to reveal.
Well, another one of the portraits, I won't name their name, but she was adopted, and she tells a story about how she met her adopted mother. Wow. And the result of that. And it wasn't really the nicest story, but she chose to do it.
Right.
But the point being is that I really think that type of technology and what I thought I was doing at the time, to varying degree of success, you got a better sense of a portrait of a person, again, if they were talking to you. And I set it up in such a way as that when you saw the projection, the video projection on the screens, you were isolated with earphones, right? So everything else, they were talking to you, okay? There were just 2 chairs, so 2 people, but they were talking to the individual. So I thought people would pay more attention to that through isolating them, right? And they would pay more attention to the character. Right. And I kind of think it worked.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
You're never sure about these things. You put them out there, but you're never really sure. Because they take on a life of their own, nothing you can control.
Right. Well, Sylvia certainly remembered it vividly in the description she gave. Out of the video portraits, you are also producing what you've called the button drawings, or button portraits, which were up at Satellite Gallery in 2022.
Yeah, with Kim Moody's work. Yeah, with Kim Moody's work, well, they were fun. I sort of regained my talent for drawing. One I thought I wasn't very good at, and it turns out not bad. So I started doing these small portraits on sheets of 12 by 9-inch paper. And I sort of, in my playful way, I wanted to add a new dimension to the character. I did Sylvia, did a few others that I did in the video. Yeah. So I put metal buttons with sayings on them, because I have a large collection of them. So, but they were sort of meant to add a narrative quality to the character, so they implied a little bit of a story like the film pieces did. Yeah. So I did about, I can't remember how many I did, maybe 20 or so. Yeah. Of those.
And this we arrive now where we can describe all these pieces that we've been pulling together to get to what you've described as a project that started out of curiosity, almost on a whim. Let me photograph you and draw you.
David, are you there?
David is on there. How did Almost David come into being?
Well, I actually started doing some watercolors because I started adding color to those portrait, those button drawings.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'll
Which
do
were
some
black and
watercolor.
white before.
They were graphite and ink.
Graphite.
Yeah, graphite and ink. And, well, black and white and gray. So I started adding color, and I thought, well, I might do some watercolor. So I did some watercolors. They're on a 25-inch square sheet. And I was started like doing this sort of uptight, sort of illustration type things. So one day, the last one I did, I was sitting there with the number 00 brush. Now, you know how small that is? It's such a tiny brush. And here I was cramping my hand, and I thought, I don't want to paint like this. I want to be like a hero. I want to paint like that. So I was telling David this, and we were sitting having coffee, and just on a whim, at the end of our sort of confab, I took him, we were leaving, and I said, David, can I take a photograph of you and try doing a painting? He said, sure. So I posed him against his brick wall, and took it back to the studio, and I did it, and to be honest, I shocked myself.
Yeah.
I did not know, I honestly, truly did not know that I could do that.
That's amazing.
And here's the lesson I learned from that day, because I know you're going to ask that. What I learned and why I felt I was such a bad painter when I was younger is that I was thinking, I wanted it too much, and I was thinking way too hard about it.
Mm.
So when I did David's painting, I wasn't thinking about it at all. I just started doing the watercolors without thinking of the same way I did those early black and white drawings, those contour drawings, right? Because I didn't care if I messed up. The beauty of it is when you're working in your studio, especially with paper, you can rip it up and throw it away and no one's the wiser, right? And so I was actually surprised by having done that. And then I asked Brian Mean if I could do his. I did his. Then I asked Ellen, I think Ellen's there, isn't she? Is Ellen there? No, is she online? No, probably not. Studio friend of mine has a studio down the hall. I did her.
Yeah.
And then it just grew from there. And then I did Thelma Rosner, who's studio next to me. So all these people were in the vicinity. So I was out somewhere one day, and I was with another friend. I said, hey, can I take a photograph of you and do a painting? And it just started spontaneously. I didn't really plan it. I didn't plan who I would do, except for one occasion. And I just took advantage of people in the moment. And I did one of Lucretia. I did one of Corey. I did one of Adam Kaplan. These are all people that are part of my community and a lot of them live and work within the range of downtown, which is where we live. And these are people I spend time with, like Ruth over there. I don't know who else is here I've done. Kathy. I did Kathy. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. The fact is, I then began to realize that I was doing something that meant a lot to me. I did 3 people at the mission services where Lucretia now works, and I volunteer 2 days a week. Because these are like Sylvia and Chuck. I have a lot of respect for these people and what they do and how they help the community. So I did 3 of them. So I began to realize that this is something I wanted to do, for these people that I know, they deserve it. Yeah. One of them is the guy that serves us our breakfast, And then Milos, Lucretia's boss, and a good friend of ours, which you all see in there right now. Yeah. And then Jerry Deschamps, who's the building super of my studio building. He's a biker and really interesting man. He's become a good friend. I mean, these are all people that, I see on a regular basis that I interact with and that I care about. And I think I just want to acknowledge their existence in some way.
That's amazing. I'm going to come to questions from all of you very shortly. So just to start warming up any thoughts and questions that you have, I got a couple more questions that I'm going to pose, but to online or here in the space, you're up next. One of the things I love about this too is that it also recalls a tradition of London artists showing work in non-traditional spaces, like Milos's Craft Beer Emporium, before coming here to TAP. And when we were talking earlier this week, that you noted that you started out by striking out on your own to show your work. And can you tell us about the experience of using non-traditional spaces in London to show your work then and now, and why you chose Milos as the first spot to show the work?
Well, 2 things I should say about that. First of all, there is a tradition. Greg Kernley used to do shows at the Talbot Inn in the hotel room part. He do a show there.
Right.
And Pete LaBelle did one at the one here. It's a tradition, sort of in London. And partly it started up because not one gallery in the world was going to show an old 16 millimeter projector on this metal stand projecting something on a photograph on the wall. They said, what if a ball blows? What if the film breaks? You know, that just wouldn't do it. So the only alternative I had was, if I wanted to show it, I would have to do it myself,
Right.
which was something that I saw people doing here. So there's an old beauty salon, again, where the can is, facing on Dundas Street. And I remember the walls, all the walls had this slight angle. You could put a mirror, so there was a chair,
Oh, yeah.
right, at a slight angle. So they weren't next to each other, per se, but, you know. So I had to buy a whole roll of white backdrop paper and staple it on the wall in order to get a white wall.
Right.
Yes, because it was all painted black as well. So I did that, and I was surprised the number of people that came. In fact, our insurance agent, because I had to get liability insurance, we had no money. He says to me, he says, I'll tell you what, if nothing happens, don't pay the premium. If something happens, pay the premium. You remember? Appreciate I mean, it was that kind of support that you could get in London. You know, you could do these crazy things, and well, yeah, why not?
Right.
I mean, another piece that you haven't asked about, I did a piece. Yeah, I wasn't overly secure about this film stuff I was doing, just to go back in time for a minute. So I did a piece that I always felt that I could put this stuff on the street. I didn't need an art gallery.
Right.
You know, I guess maybe that was a defense mechanism somehow, you know, to deal with the rejection or something. So I did a projection on the front window of our house. Remember it? At 210 Tecumseh. So, and all it was this big face just going like this, looking out, right? And then you heard these stomping footsteps stomping around. So I was such a coward that I got the thing all set up, and I hid in the back of the house, in the kitchen, and it was a porch community. So everybody was out on, all my neighbors out on their porches. So Lucretia calls me and says, Wyn, you better come and look. Uh-oh, I thought the cops were there or something. So I went out and I peeked around the front door of the curtain, and there was a slow, steady stream of cars going by and 3 people sitting on the lawn eating popcorn. So I felt a lot better after.
Yeah. Hopefully no car accidents along
No.
the way.
It was pretty funny.
That is really funny.
Yeah.
And the decision to go to Milos's, what prompted the first pieces to go there?
Because nobody else would show. My initial proposal to some people where I do it for 12 months, one a month for 12 months. And I think, again, like the early projection work, that perhaps escape there, you know. I won't finish that sentence. I think you get what I'm getting at. So I thought, okay, well, and you know, Milos and I have talked about doing stuff there in the past. So I thought, well, why not?
Right.
You know, and so I had one case built, and we put it up, and as some of the people here will attest that came, we had fun. Every opening was fun. It was a party. You know, we all got to catch up and chat and have a good time, and it was so unlike a regular opening you would have at a gallery, right?
Yeah.
Where everybody's formal and everybody's playing a role, you know.
Right. And how did it make it to TAP? I imagine a conversation with Sandra.
Yeah. Well, I was at the Tom Wilson show, and I saw that little room.
Oh,
And
wow.
Sandra, and I don't know,
room.
we just got talking, right? It just came about, not by any design. We just got talking about it. I said, well, what would you think of me doing this? And she said, yeah.
Amazing.
So, yeah, and it's been great ever since. They've talked about support. It's really
Right.
fantastic.
And that's, I mean, an experience of community in organizing the community
Yeah,
portraits.
but now she has artists asking to use the room,
Yeah.
which is good. I mean, if I open the door like that for TAP, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think so? Yeah, no, I think it's important.
You've noted there were 4 very poignant portraits that were inspired by your volunteering in the
Yeah.
community. Can you talk about those portraits?
Well, I mean, each individual, very real strong individuals, and they're very hardworking people. There was Fidat, she was a woman of color, and then there was Bailey, who's one of the assistant managers, and keep wanting to call her Wendy. What's her name? Emily, yeah.
Good
And
assist.
then Lucretia by default later on because they hired her.
But
So she now becomes.
But we haven't established where yet. So where was this at the mission?
What do you mean?
Where these 4 volunteers were?
Oh, they work in the back.
Right.
where they sort stuff out.
Right.
'Cause
But
when
at
I-
the mission, you volunteer at the
yeah,
mission.
yeah. So when I first started, I had to empty all these garbage bags of donations and stuff and do the rough, what they call rough sorting.
Yeah.
Now I'm in the professional level. I get to wear it.
Moving
No,
on up.
I clipped a tie onto the apron they gave me. or something, yeah. So
That's amazing. A question, and this is my last question, then I'm going to come to everybody in the room for questions and online as well. The project started in 2023, and it's about to finish. It's exhibiting run from September through to the end of this month, so
Yeah.
May. I'm wondering how the work, the exhibition, has changed your experience of community. Have you learned anything about your community going through this process?
that's a good question. I hadn't really, thought about it. While I'm doing it, I don't usually think
Yeah.
of the consequences. I guess I sort of measure the response, both of the sitters, the people that agreed to sit for me, and, the audience response. The one thing that surprised me, and there's a couple of people here that can attest to it because they've seen it, that before I actually did the exhibition, what precipitated me coming up with that project, there was an empty studio across the hall from my studio, and my landlord generously said, yeah, you can use it for a couple of months. So I put them all up, right? And I invited a bunch of people up, my friends, almost all the participants I invited to come up. Two things. One thing they all noted, which was really interesting to me, was the effect of the portraits. They and I'm quoting people, that they seem to capture a certain character that's coming
Right.
through that a traditional portrait can't or didn't or doesn't. And the other thing I noted there is that it was difficult to look at all of them because they're all sort of fighting for attention. It's like being in a crowd and everybody wants to talk to you. And I thought, well, maybe showing them all together is the wrong idea. And if I
Right.
did, I have to put them really far apart,
Yeah, Right.
And so,
that's interesting, right?
yeah. So that's what I came up with that idea.
The idea of doing it in one or two at a time. So
Yeah,
that
well,
it's
just
not-
one at a time for 12 months.
Right. Otherwise, it's cacophony. You just have
Exactly,
everybody.
yeah. Well, that's actually a word that I use in my mind. This is like a real cacophony. So,
Yeah. Actually, maybe, and we'll turn on the second mic to get some audience questions. But maybe a place to start would be there were a couple of people here who had their portraits done. Does anybody who had their portrait done maybe want to talk a little bit about or your reflections on having your portrait done? Is anybody brave to address that? Not to put you on the spot. There we go. We've got a taker here over here. Oh, Sandra right here up front.
should I leave the room?
This is good.
I had mine done at Milos's, as I'm an employee there, but I had it done with Joel was Joel with me? I can't remember.
No, you were alone. They were
Oh, yes,
individual ones,
I
right?
was alone. And the funny thing is that, customers would come in and say, oh, is that you? And so one day, a customer came in and he says, one of the servers, come here. He comes over and he says, I just saw her the other day and she looked fantastic. Did she just die? She went, no, she's still alive. So, but I found a lot of different comments from a lot of different people.
Right.
A lot of positive comments.
Right.
Yeah.
But they
about how good
recognized
it
you.
was. Pardon me?
They recognized you. There was
Absolutely, yeah.
And people asked for your autograph.
Yes. Yes, they did. Anyway, it was a really good experience.
amazing. I think I saw a few clustered around here. Anybody else want to take a crack at this of what the experience was like to have your or anyone? We're putting them on the spot. I could have prompted them at the beginning. But any other questions and comments from the room as well, or online?
When many years ago, I was in your studio with a group called From the Society for Learning and Retirement. And I remember these very, very high ceilings. And I think you had a mural all around the studio walls of books Is that true?
Um,
Because it's haunted me, and I have wondered ever since if you were a good reader, if
Oh.
you enjoyed books.
I'm quite a voracious reader, yeah. Yes. I think the studio you might be thinking of was at the lithographic building, Wright's Litho building, Wellington. Is that correct? Is that where it was? Because that was the only one that I ever had that had very, very high ceilings. And there's always a lot of books in my studio, even now. They're all scattered all over the place. But I never did a mural with them. So
It
I'm
was
sorry.
really a border along all the walls of
Yeah.
the,
Yeah, I
to the ceilings.
I don't
My
recollect.
other image is one of a video you did in which you were pressing your tongue against the screen.
That was Pete LaBelle's tongue. And that was up here at Satellite, about when they were opening Satellite, Demir and Maddock and Allison, that they owned the building. So they had this grand opening, and Pete and I were just kidding around. I said, "So here,
Very
lick this piece of
sarcastic.
glass, Pete." So he was up there and was blown up on the window, of course, of him going, against the glass. So,
When you
pardon.
had the various individuals who saw their portraits for the first time, what were some of the, we talked about this a little bit, but there were a lot of surprising reactions that you had. What were can you recall some of the surprising reactions people had to, or things that you didn't maybe expect?
Yeah. There's one, Julie, who cleans our studio building.
Right.
I asked her if I would. She was delighted. Yes, I did. Put it on the wall. I brought her in. She's looking at it and says, "Where are my boobs?" She wears baggy clothes when she's cleaning, right? So I mean, what can you say to that?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was some. Some, of course, didn't like them. 2 people didn't like them.
Yeah.
And the deal was the same as what I did with the video portraits. If they didn't like it, I would rip it up and throw them away. But they didn't want me to rip them up. That they weren't happy with their visage, the way I rendered it, or the way perhaps the look they had when I took the photograph. So I had to come up with an idea of what to do with these things. So I remember my friend Ken Smithers' fathers used to have these horrible True Detective magazines. And whenever they showed photographs of criminals, but they couldn't be identified, they put a black bar across their faces.
And you
So
can see there
for those of you who have
a
never
black
seen
bar
that.
from a distance.
So there were 2 that didn't want me to do it, so I put the black
Everybody
bar
can see
across
that?
their faces. So.
Yeah.
Which actually could have opened it up a whole other series of the type of portraits. But, it's the type of thing that you can't do it on purpose. It has to be natural and has to be in collaboration with the sitter, right? I couldn't just go out and make a portrait and put a black bar across your face. It's sort of antithetical to the idea. It had to be a collaborative
Yeah.
process.
Are you going to miss the openings now that this is the last?
I will never miss openings. I'll miss the wine, but
Because it's a long run, September to May.
it has been, yeah. But it's been amazing. I mean, I'm blessed with really good friends that show up. They're supportive, and they're critical, in a really positive way, and they have a great sense of humor. And I want to thank all of them for that. The reason I made the book was as a thank you to all of them.
Right.
That's the only reason I made that book. And
Yeah.
I made sure they all got the first part of the edition. David Merritt was first, of course.
Yeah, and they're numbered. They're
And
numbered.
they're
on-
numbered, yeah. Limited
Everybody
edition, yeah.
Absolutely. When I was in, I think I see a hand here. Sandra?
Uh-oh, it's Phil.
Hi, Wyn.
Hi, Phil.
Thank you very much. It's nice to listen to you. I've got an observation, really, more than anything else. I didn't know the portrait that you did of your father until this evening, and drawing the connection between the portraits that were shown here at TAP and that particular work. I'm struck by the sort of quietness you have in your work when it comes to the sitter. We're so used to, especially in a Northern European tradition, to seeing quite bombastic portraits that
Yeah.
want to leap out at the viewer and engage the viewer. And yet your approach to portraiture is quiet, sensitive. There's a vulnerability to it in many ways.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I'm wondering whether that's a sense of you that comes out through the portraiture there that maybe you hadn't anticipated.
You know, Philip, I honestly don't know. I can only guess that's because of my own insecurities that, you know, I bring them to the work, and maybe it comes out through those individuals. But I've never sort of analyzed it to that degree. So I'm sorry I can't really comment beyond that.
But a lovely observation.
No,
on the
thank you
work.
very much.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. When I was in your studio, I don't know if I'm allowed, whether this work is still under the cone of silence. The hats, is that something that you can?
No, that's fine.
You
yeah.
can tell us a little bit about?
Well, after the portraits.
Because you work in a series, right?
Yeah,
This is a new
yeah.
series.
I have a very short attention span, so you know, and I'm really curious. I really am, and I like to experiment. So I just wanted to do something different because the last portrait, I had to hound the person, and thanks to Sandra, she's not here, hounded him on my behalf to agree to do it. And I'm really glad I did it, but I found it really hard, and I realized doing that portrait that this is probably the end of it for me. So which is fine. So I thought, well, you know, what am I going to do next? So you never really know, right? So I have a collection of hats, and I wear eyeglasses for a good part of my life. And a friend of mine once said to me that your eyeglasses are your face, right? So you got to be really careful. So anyways, I thought, well, I'll just paint my hats. So I put my hat on, took a photograph, and I used my face as a blank canvas. I didn't really want to emphasize on my visage. And what I did, I wanted to paint the hat. I did a good job painting the hat, so I was really impressed. You know, used a lot of gouache, give you a soft texture in the hat. I knew. So then in the eyeglasses, I went to sort of like the paranormal shopping kit.
Yeah.
You know, so I had reflections of UFOs trying to beam up a tree, you know, like in my little glasses. And then I had the devil, and I had Nosferatu, and I had an image of mental telepathy. Gosh, what are the other ones? I'm trying to remember them all.
That's a good list.
So all these sort of funny things that, you know, and the thing with these paintings, it's hard to look at the whole painting. You're either looking at the hat or the glasses or the face. It's kind of hard to put it all together because they're so distinctly different. Even though the face was a blank canvas, I sort of did things with my mouth a little bit different here, there, slightly different shading. So the face has a certain weird expression that may have nothing to do with anything else you're looking at. So these three things just became a bit of a thing. I just don't want to try, see if I could do it.
Yeah,
So,
amazing. Well, I want to thank everybody who joined us here at TAP for coming down to see Wyn's work. It's on until the end of the month, so anybody who's watching online that wants to see the community portraits. And thank you to everybody who joined us online for tonight's event. Thank you to Sandra, Sarah, and the whole team here at TAP for hosting us in the space. And most of all, thank you to Wyn for such a wonderful, generous answers. It was a real pleasure to sit down and explore your work to prepare for today, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much. And thank you all, everybody.